An Impossible Case by Archerwrites. Are you married, Dazai? The question, completely out of the blue, had the entire agency pausing. The office went dead silent as all eyes turned to the man in question, who was flopped on the agency couch, thoroughly neglecting the steadily growing pile of paperwork on his desk. Everyone knew this was a ridiculous question. No one, like Dazai, could possibly find someone willing to put up with him for that long. It was simply a fact of life. The earth was round, it was a Monday, and Dazai was not married. But the fact that Atsushi was asking a question with such an obvious answer piqued the detective's interest. What made him think the answer might be something different? Dazai slid his attention from his book to study Atsushi, whose cheeks were flushed a faint pink. After a few moments of stifling silence, though, his face spread into a wide, cheery smile. Why? What makes you say that, Atsushi? The poor boy's flush only deepened. He didn't want to pry, and the gleam in Dazai's eyes was very unsettling. Well, I thought I saw a wedding ring on the necklace you were wearing yesterday on our mission. I thought it might have just been the light or something, but he trailed off, staring down at his feet and thoroughly regretting asking this question. It's nothing. Forget I asked. I really didn't mean to. Yes, I am married. Congratulations, Atsushi. I wondered when someone would figure it out. Silence. But while Dazai turned his attention back to his book, the rest of the office was stunned into silence, and only could stare at Dazai with wide, disbelieving eyes. This couldn't be possible, could it? Unless the earth wasn't round, and today was actually Wednesday. Dazai must have been bluffing. But the way he'd said it, so lightly as if he hadn't just shattered everything they knew to be true, didn't match the lilting sing-song voice he used when he was teasing them. More specifically, Kunikita, who had snapped his pen and was now questioning life itself. Fortunately, this was a detective agency. They would get to the bottom of this. 1. Dazai was currently sitting at his desk, feet propped up on papers scattered across it, while he leaned back in his chair with his hands folded behind his head, humming a song he'd certainly invented himself. The agency had been studying him for the past few days now, noting every small detail in hopes it would clue them into who Dazai's mystery lover could be. If he even had one in the first place, Kunikita insisted. Rampo had only replied saying he was in denial. So, when Dazai hopped up from his desk at noon claiming he was getting lunch with someone and would be back in a few hours if he felt so inclined, the agency immediately moved to Rampo's desk to begin trading theories. Rampo watched all this with a telltale smile while he inhaled bags upon bags of snacks. He's probably going to meet his spouse, Kunikita began with a frown. It's 16 minutes from noon, so maybe she works at a standard job and is on her lunch break. But this never happens, Yosono added from where she sat next to Rampo on his desk, munching on her own bag of snacks. If that were the case, Dazai would probably go out to meet with her more often, wouldn't he? This isn't the first time he's left around noon on a Thursday, though. I never paid much attention to it before, but perhaps this is a regular occurrence none of us took into account. He could be only telling us now because he knows we're trying to figure him out and thinks it's funny. But every few weeks he leaves around lunch, and if he bothers coming back at all, returns to the office in a few hours. How do you know that? Atsushi asked. That rock for brains is constantly disrupting my schedules. I write down all the dates and all the times he leaves work unannounced so I can make up for it. Kunikita scowled, tapping his notebook for emphasis. Atsushi was nodding along with a solemn press of his lips together and furrowed brows. I think it's safe to say that he's been going out to meet with his wife for a while now. We just didn't notice. Well, and he didn't tell us, he added with a sigh. So his wife likes going out for lunch, and probably works a busy schedule. Kunikita frowned. Who do we know that fits that description? Tanizaki mused from where he sat with Naomi nearby. His question was considered, but no one dared look toward him lest they were scarred for weeks. That prompted a buzzing silence where the agency molded over. After a few moments of quiet contemplation, Kyoka spoke up. Miss Higuchi. Atsushi whipped around to face her. What? He was met with a shrug. Higuchi likes going out to eat, and she's very busy. Oh, she's that blonde woman from the Port Mafia, isn't she? Tanizaki frowned. Yosono narrowed her eyes. I really don't think Dazai got married to Higuchi. Kyoka only shrugged again and returned her attention to her crepe, tuning the rest of the conversation out. 2. It was a Tuesday when Dazai got a call at 2 in the afternoon. He was slow to grab his phone and didn't make a single effort to keep his voice down when he answered, or turn the speaker off so the rest of the agency couldn't hear their conversation. Why, hello, my dear. Could you just not go a day without hearing my beautiful voice? The entire office turned to stare at him.
"Shut the hell up,"
was the irritated response on the other end.
"I need you to get your lanky ass over to my office. And it's a red situation, so don't even think about bringing your agency pose along."
Oh, but I'm trusted with classified information? If I didn't know any better, I'd...
"Cut the bullshit. Get over here in 10 minutes.
The call ended. Everyone stared. Well, you must have heard that, Kunikita. Unfortunately, my beloved is in dire need of my assistance, and I can't say how long I'll be out. You'll manage just fine without me, I'm sure. And then he was gone, disappearing through the door and leaving the rest of the office gaping after him. Rampo's desk quickly became very crowded. So his wife is angry, Atsushi mumbled. Very angry. They sounded like they hate each other. Kunikita looked like a man possessed as he flipped through his notebook, shaking his head and scowling so deeply that Atsushi feared his face would get stuck in it. This can't be right. What kind of marriage is that? Yelling at each other like animals? His wife was the only one yelling, Yoshino pointed out with an arched brow. That's not the point. This is ridiculous. But we did gather a new piece of information, Atsushi butted in, for fear that Kunikita would start tearing out his hair or kicking chairs. His wife works somewhere secret, where they have codes like red and deal with classified information. That's something. She could be a government agent, Yoshino offered. That's a reasonable argument, Kunikita began murmuring to himself as he scribbled furiously in his notebook, a sight the rest of the agency opted to ignore. That would explain why she and Dazai don't meet for lunch or anything very often. Most normal married couples do that, I think, but she's working for the government, and Dazai is then... Atsushi trailed off, deep in thought. Yeah, that all makes sense. It checks all the boxes, but we still don't know who she is yet. That, and we have to confirm she's a government official before we can shut down all other possibilities, Yoshino mused, leaning on Rampo and occasionally stealing a snack from his hand. I don't see how Dazai could possibly get married to someone with a job like that, though. The guy's an asshole. Maybe not to her, Kenji called out from where he was hauling giant potted trees into the conference room. His phone call with her says otherwise. Kunikita scowled. I think it's safe to say that he's an asshole to everyone, spouse included. Rampo popped a candy into his mouth, peering over Kunikita's notes with a sparkle in his eyes. 3. Atsushi, would you come with me on an errand? It's very short, I promise. Atsushi blinked from where he sat at his desk, writing a report Dazai was supposed to have finished last week. Oh sure, Kunikita, can't be back in 15 minutes. Atsushi, I trust you to make sure this idiot doesn't drown in the river. Kunikita shot Dazai a glare, who only gasped and pressed a hand to his chest as if the statement had physically wounded him. Kunikita, I'm hurt! I thought you knew by now that I dreamed to welcome the sweet release of death with only a beautiful woman by my side. He sighed, looking away to gaze into an obscure nothing. A long, suffering sigh before Kunikita turned back to his desk. Hurry up. With a wide grin, Dazai looped his arm through Atsushi's and dragged him out of the office while Atsushi just hoped he wouldn't have to turn into a babysitter for his mentor. They ended up walking along the river, but to Atsushi's endless relief, Dazai didn't once try hopping in with heavy pockets and the overly cheery grin he often used to disguise malicious intent. Atsushi was becoming more and more nervous the longer they walked and didn't arrive at any destination, but he was eventually able to steel his nerves. Dazai, where are we going? Dazai looked down at him like it was obvious. Why, I'm going to buy flowers. Flowers? Atsushi frowned. Who would Dazai be? They're for my wife. Atsushi stared at him with the widest eyes. Your wife? Of course. Dazai furrowed his brows, just a bit too much to be thoroughly convincing. Oh, did I not mention that before? We got into a bit of an argument recently, and I didn't want to be sleeping on the couch tonight, so I'm gonna buy flowers. Atsushi could only stare at Dazai with his mouth agape and eyes blown wide. Of course the agency knew he was married, but he didn't expect Dazai to openly talk about it again. That, and it sounded like their relationship was a bit tenuous if she was making him sleep on the couch. Right, okay. He did his best to reorganize his thoughts while they continued walking, and it wasn't long before the pair ended up outside a small parlor with lots of pretty flower displays in the window. Atsushi didn't know anything about them, but he found the shop to be very cute, and when they went in, he watched Dazai talk to the man in the front. It smelled nice, too. Will that be everything? Yes, that's all. Right, I'll get those ready for you in just a moment. Atsushi watched the man shuffle around behind the counter, grabbing a sharp cutting tool and a pair of gloves before going where he assumed was the back of the store. Dazai joined him near the door, hands in his pockets and an easy smile on his face. So, what kind of flowers did you get? His smile softened the tiniest bit. Atsushi nearly missed it. Oh, you'll see. And he bought red camellias, Atsushi finished, sucking in a long breath and sitting back in his chair with a heaving sigh. Story successfully recounted. His audience blinked. Okay, Yoshino arched an eyebrow. And? Oh, red camellias are very important in flower language. Kenji popped up from where he was moving a desk. They symbolize passion and love. My sister grows them back home, and she always gives a bouquet of them to her girlfriend every week when they go on their Saturday picnics. Yoshino smiled a little at that, but Kunikita immediately began writing in his notebook. Furious, with brows pinched together tightly enough, Atsushi thought he might have wrinkles there once he relaxed his face again. So he loves her. The words were quiet, almost intended only for him to know. But Atsushi frowned upon hearing that. Well, of course he does. He probably wouldn't have married her if he didn't. So now we know 3 things. Tanizaki lifted his fingers. His wife is busy, she works somewhere secretive and deals with classified information, and she likes flowers. That's progress. Not much, Yoshino grumbled. How are we supposed to identify this lady if that's all we know about her? Why don't you just ask Dazai, Kenji asked, dropping his desk and causing the entire floor to quake. Because, Yoshino sighed, taking a candy from Rampo's hand. Dazai knows we're trying to figure this out. Asking him outright would wound our pride, and I'm not about to let that asshole win this. Atsushi frowned. Someone who likes flowers, he mused, delving into the depths of his memory in hopes of thinking of anyone who might match the picture they'd conjure up, while Rampo and Yoshino squabbled in the background. 4. Dazai, where have you been? Kunikita leaned back against his desk, notebook and pen in hand, while he stared down at Dazai, who had just arrived at the office 4 hours late and wearing the same shit-eating grin he did every time he was able to irritate Kunikita. I was at a wine tasting. Oh, did I forget to mention that? Oops. He grinned, plopping down onto the agency's couch and blinking up at Kunikita with big, innocent eyes. Wait, Dazai, do you even like wine? Yoshino poked her head out from her operating room, holding a chainsaw stained red. She knew the preferred alcohol beverages of everyone in the agency. The day she joined, she'd made it a mission to scope them out for a potential drinking partner, but had no such luck. Dazai let out a long-suffering sigh. No, I don't. It's too sour and so expensive. Unfortunately, my wife dragged me there and I couldn't refuse unless I wanted to land myself in the hospital. He frowned. Atsushi stared. That doesn't sound healthy. Oh, it's perfectly normal. Dazai waved his hand. I'd be more concerned if it wasn't a concern. The entire agency stared. When Dazai left the building promptly 2 hours later, the rest of the office immediately converged on Rampo's desk, with wide eyes and worried frowns. Now what? Atsushi whispered. Dazai wasn't in the building anymore, of course, but he still felt the need to keep his voice down anyway. So either Dazai's wife is a psychopath, Yoshino shrugged, or he's being dramatic. I don't think so. Kunikita's face was grave when the group looked at him. I think he was being serious. When Dazai tells jokes like that, he's usually trying to goad people. Ew, Yoshino coughed. But that particular comment is much more concerning than the goading, Kunikita continued, ignoring the doctor's jab. I think the wife might be more violent than we anticipated. But we know she likes wine, Tanizaki butted in. That's something, right? Yeah, that's definitely a good clue. Atsushi tried whacking his brain for anyone who might fit their ever-growing profile of Dazai's wife, but he just couldn't think of any. He never had seen Dazai with a woman who wasn't proposing a double suicide with, so he didn't have anything else to go off of. This was becoming more and more difficult the more clues they gathered. You should just try thinking a little harder. All heads turned to Rampo, who was frowning down at them all from where he sat on his desk, looking like some kind of condescending father. What do you mean, Rampo? We're trying as hard as we can, Atsushi frowned. Then try harder. This is just painful, he sighed, popping a caramel into his mouth. Think. A busy person working for a secret organization. Someone who likes wine and may or may not like flowers. Red flowers. Silence. You're all hopeless. 5. Kunikita approached Dazai's desk with a smooth manila folder and a firm scowl. Dazai, he began warningly, waiting for the man in question to turn his attention away from the complete guide to suicide. The boss needs you to bring these to the Port Mafia and deliver them to Executive Nakahara Chuya. Vital information on the guild that eventually needs to get passed on to their leader, but he has to look over it first. Kunikita should have known from that wide smile he received in return that Dazai was the worst person for the job. Leave it to me, Dazai grinned, taking the folder in one hand and tossing the book onto his desk with the other. You'll come back within the hour? Kunikita added, not quite a question. Dazai only waved a hand halfway across the office. Yes, of course. Maybe I can see my wife while I'm there, he added, in what should have been a comment meant for himself, but he was sure to speak loud enough for the entire agency to hear. Before anyone could say anything, though, he opened the door and left, with a, "Don't miss me too much," before shutting the door, and leaving the office in complete silence. Rampo's desk became swarmed in an instant. His wife works for the Port Mafia? Atsushi exclaimed. That can't be possible. Maybe she's a janitor there. But even Kunikita knew he sounded ridiculous. What's wrong with his wife being part of the Port Mafia? Yoshino arched a brow. That just means she can probably keep Dazai in check. They ignored that. Maybe she's not a murderer. Tanizaki shrugged, chuckling nervously. She might be an errand girl or something. Or maybe she's one of the highest-ranking members. Kunikita mused. We have no idea. An executive? I don't think so. Atsushi frowned, trying to remember those he'd met during their first peaceful meeting between the agency and the Port Mafia to strategize against the guild. There was Nakahara Chuya, Dazai's ex-partner. Koyu Ozaki was the one with the fancy kimono that Yoshino always talked about, and the only other one Atsushi could recall was the tall man with pale hair. But it does make sense. We know she works with classified information. That's probably why she didn't want anyone else going with Dazai when she called him last week. Yoshino shrugged. And if she has access to something important enough to hide from us, the Port Mafia is kind of in very temporary allies. She's probably not a low-ranking member. Kunikita looked pallid. This is impossible, he murmured, with the most hollow voice Atsushi had ever heard. It has to be a joke. Kenshi patted his cheek in passing. But we still have no idea who she is. Atsushi frowned, leaning back in his chair. And it's been weeks. Dazai's good at keeping secrets. You could just ask him, Rampo said around a mouthful of chips. Absolutely not, was the immediate response. We're not going to lose to that asshole. Then what do we do? Atsushi frowned. None of the information we have has gotten us any closer to figuring out who she is, besides what we learned today. Yoshino stood up with a grin, and the way the light caught her eyes made her look almost sadistic. Or maybe it wasn't the light. Easy. We're going to go meet her ourselves. +1. Dazai sauntered through the Port Mafia headquarters with such ease that one might have assumed he was an executive himself. It was second nature to make his way up to the 6th story of the building, down the left hallway until he reached the door at the end. Without bothering to knock, he opened the door and raised the manila folder with a wide smile. Chibi, he hummed. I have a delivery. Sitting at his desk, back to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Yokohama's finest views, was Executive Nakahara Chuya, poring over a slew of papers while he spun a shiny pen between his fingers. He immediately scowled upon seeing Dazai. Bastard, didn't anyone ever teach you to knock? Just as well as you were taught to grow taller, I assume, was the quick reply before Dazai made his way around Chuya's desk and promptly sat down on his lap, wrapping his arms around Chuya's neck and resting his hands at his nape. Hey, get off me! Chuya scowled, pushing Dazai backward to no avail. I have work to do. Not that you'd know anything about that, he added with a pointed glare. Dazai only hummed. Of course not, slug. Who do you take me for? Chuya rolled his eyes. Oh, speaking of which... Dazai reached over to grab the forgotten folder, discarded onto Chuya's desk a mere moments ago. This is for you to look over before it's given to Mori. Information about the guild. Chuya frowned, flipping over a few of the documents with furrowed brows. Why do you need me to look over this? I already have a shit ton to do as it is. A shrug. I suppose you're just that important, Chibi. Right, Chuya snorted, tossing the folder back onto his desk. Dazai watched him with the smallest teasing smile as he fiddled with the hair at Chuya's nape, while Chuya sank his arms around Dazai's waist. The pair stayed like that in comfortable silence for a few moments before Dazai leaned forward, capturing Chuya's lips in a slow, sweet kiss. They sat there, languid and unhurried, and soaked up the company of each other for the few moments they could steal. Those quickly ended when the door to Chuya's office burst open and revealed 7 figures standing in the hallway, staring with open mouths and wide eyes. Chuya immediately tensed and pulled away, attempting to push Dazai off him in an effort to preserve his dignity, his status as a feared mafioso, or perhaps both. Dazai stayed firmly in Chuya's lap, though, and frowned at the agency members. "What are you all doing here? I thought there were still a few minutes left until my curfew." Kunikita looked like a fish gaping for air as his mouth opened and opened again, only to close a second later. What? Are you feeling all right, Kunikita? Did we break him?" Dazai turned to glance at Chuya, who was studying the agency members warily. Yosuno was the first to reply. "You cheeky bastard," she chuckled. Dazai only shrugged. "Dazai, aren't you married?" Atsushi gaped, feeling concerned and misled and very, very confused. Dazai had the gall to look surprised. "Yes, I am. I thought I told you." "You said you had a wife!" Atsushi exclaimed. Upon hearing that, Chuya turned to Dazai with a withering scowl and attempted to, once again, shove him away. It worked this time, and Dazai landed on the floor with a surprised oof. "What the hell? You told him you had a wife?" Dazai stood up slowly, rubbing the place on his back that had hit the floor with a childish pout. "Of course, I wasn't going to lie to them." "You already fucking did, bastard!" So stingy. The agency watched with eyes blown wider than before, and it seemed none of their voices would work as they stood in the doorway in complete silence. Dazai, however, turned to face them with a wide grin, gesturing to a scowling Chuya. "Everyone, allow me to formally introduce you to my wife." "I'm not your wife, asshole!" Chuya stood up abruptly, gripping the front of Dazai's shirt as the pair stared at each other for a few minutes. They seemed to be having some sort of telepathic conversation, because after many awkward moments of silence, Chuya let go of Dazai and turned to face the agency, looking more than over with the entire ordeal. "I'm his husband." Nobody spoke. After more long, awkward minutes, Chuya let out a long, suffering sigh and approached the doorway with the most polite smile he could muster. "Sorry this idiot caused all this trouble. You can go back to your detective hole while I sort this out. It'll be a little while." He all but forced them into the hallway before slamming and locking the door, after which the agency heard nothing. Atsushi blinked. "I don't know what to think." Kunikita was staring at the door with hollow eyes and a pallid face. "My life is a lie," was a nearly silent whisper. Rampa was the one who clapped his hands and started walking back the way he came, sucking on a lollipop. "Congratulations, you finally figured it out. It only took you catching them 5 minutes away from eating each other's faces before you got it," he sighed, pressing the elevator button and not bothering to wait for them because the doors closed and the rest of the agency had to wait for the next one or take the stairs. They ended up taking the stairs. "Kunikita, are you—" "Just let him process it, Atsushi. I don't know how long it'll take for him to recover from that," Yosuno mused, glancing back at Kunikita as he stumbled down the steps with a white-knuckled grip on his notebook. "My life is a lie, my life is a lie, my life is—" Chuya turned to face Dazai with a withering glare, arms crossed over his chest as he stalked toward him. "You want to tell me what that was about?" he hissed. Dazai, who was leaning against Chuya's desk with a self-satisfied smile, only hummed in response. "I'm not sure what there is to say." "Why the fuck did your detective agency show up at my office babbling about you having a wife?" Dazai shrugged. "They wanted to figure out who my spouse was. I said I had a wife and left them a few clues. But I suppose they didn't end up figuring it out on their own," he simpered. Chuya scoffed, shaking his head and stomping in front of Dazai when their bodies were only centimeters apart. "Mackerel bastard," he muttered. Dazai felt a smile tug at his lips as he leaned over until their noses were nearly touching. Slug. They caught each other in a slow kiss, intertwined against the view of the entire city of Yokohama, where, somewhere, Kunikita was questioning everything he'd ever known to be true. Okay, I love angst because angst is like literally peak writing, and I love hurt and comfort because, but crack and crack treated seriously is like my second go-to tag to read on AO3. I love crack treated seriously, it's the best. Also, side note, hopefully the audio's good because this is probably going to be my current setup for how I record. Because all of the previous fanfics before this, the station or the way I've been trying to record has just changed every single time. I haven't done one the same way. But anyway, the way I recorded this fanfic is probably going to be the way I record all of my fanfics. So, yeah.